Many times you'll find in the acquisitions, they're just buying EBITDA, right? So they are diagnostically looking at what they can benefit from it.
Yeah.
Well, that might not be the same motivation for the seller.
Thanks for tuning in to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. Let's go make healthcare better together. Yeah, so let's talk about the acquisition process, if you don't mind. And
Sure.
I'd said we would state kind of the pre-acquisition and post-acquisition and the role of HR. So if I'm unaware of, from that perspective, somebody that's listening right now, what type of things would an HR, CHRO be doing to help evaluate the fit of a business to either be acquired or to acquire?
Yeah.
What do you guys do?
So let me just back up for 1 second,
please,
if I could, Spencer. So one of the exciting parts of my career is that I moved into the private equity portfolio space. So what does that mean? That really means that I started to work for private equity portfolio companies. And so those are companies that the private equity firms own. Right? So clearly, private equity has their eyes on everything within that space. So what happens in many of those acquisitions is those organizations are either going to sell within a given period of time, or they're going to acquire other companies. They're either going to merge, and you might have what's called strategic buyers or private equity buyers, right? And so everything is different. And each acquisition has its own fingerprints, right? And you kind of think, oh, it's an acquisition. No, it's all different. Your players are different. Your financials are different. Your due diligence is different. And so when you're looking at the holistic pieces of an acquisition, there's so much that goes on. Now, the PE firms and many of the organizations make it look very simple. And over time, we've absolutely been able to solidify the process and the procedures and the standard operating procedures to ensure that we have successful integrations. But it's quite an ordeal, and it's an exciting one. So within a deal process, there's many different, let's say, phases of a deal. From an HR perspective, you're always looking at the value add, right? From HR, you have great HR out there, you have not so great HR out there. I prefer the great HR. And so you're trying to identify what you can do as an HR leader to add the greatest value to the organization. Okay. Now, that's through people, that's through economics, that's through integration, that's through culture. There's many different aspects within that. And so when you're looking at the phases of a deal, you say, okay, pre-deal, right? That's all due diligence. What are you looking at in the due diligence process, right? So let's take that for a second. Now, the larger organizations and consulting companies, they're going to come in and they're going to do heavy financial due diligence, right? That's number one. I mean, does the financials match? Is it worth the EBITDA that they have it and that they will be able to have a multiplier to pay for the organization? Is the price point affordable? Is it extreme? So there are many different aspects of the financial due diligence, and we're going to leave that to the experts, right? That's what they do best. But then you're also going to look at the people, right? That's the critical component. So who are we acquiring? Who are the owners? Who are the founders? What's the organization look like? What is it? How does it cascade down throughout the organization? Now, when you're doing an acquisition, as you can imagine, it's all confidential. So you really can't go too far down into the organization. So we will absolutely do our due diligence on the owners and the senior leaders.
Okay. Yeah, and what is involved in that due diligence on the owners and senior leaders?
Background investigations.
Okay.
You'll identify legal potential issues that might be pending. You'll identify anything that could be nefarious. You will identify any potential issues as it relates to employee relations issues. So there's many different aspects, and hopefully you don't have any of those. And hopefully it works really well.
Yeah, hopefully there's not a Twitter account out there where they're saying incendiary things politically, or I imagine anything that's accessible and above board is going to be factored into that analysis, right? Of the people that you're acquiring. I mean, and I don't know if you could probably say, but are there any stories where it was like, oh my God, we can't acquire this company because XYZ person did something crazy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've done over 150 acquisitions from an HR standpoint, and definitely have seen a few of those. Like, why are we going here? And let's not do this.
And those type of things can derail a deal, right? They can. Okay.
And do. Absolutely.
And they do.
And you have to investigate them further and say, okay, interview everybody, get a general sense of, what occurred. Is it fair? Is it reasonable? Were people wrongly accused?
Yeah.
So it's not always as simple cookie cutter.
Well, and I would say maybe if an existing lawsuit is not necessarily a deal killer, because they might be able to win that lawsuit. It might be close. There might be a settlement opportunity. It may be frivolous lawsuit for all.
And do we have to indemnify them should that occur?
Yeah, fair enough.
Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, $1.3 billion of stop-loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has two distinct parts. Number one, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number two, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale.
And then we'll also look at the benefit.
That's exactly where I was going next. You read my mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you looking for in the from a benefit standpoint during this due diligence?
So it's critically important that when you're doing an acquisition to keep your employees that you're acquiring whole, wherever you can, right? So we need to understand what their benefit plans were, what their programs were, were they fully funded, were they self-funded, what their claim spends were, and really get a general framework and an idea of, okay, how does this compare to our organization? And the other part is that as the acquiring company, do we mandate that those organizations assimilate into our plans, or will we allow them to be standalones, which can occur as well?
So they could keep their actual plan in existence. It would just stay parallel to the acquiring organization's benefit package. But eventually, the goal would probably be to merge those two together. Right?
It is, because the cost to maintain 2 or 3 different plans is just exorbitant.
Yeah. And so I think I want to at least kind of push us just for a moment in the direction of what this show is often about, which is the benefits aspect. And I want to look at it in the confines of the M&A process, right? So as you're thinking about benefits, if you're doing due diligence from a cost perspective, like what are the things that you're looking out for as an acquiring entity of an existing benefit package, maybe some red flags that you're looking for when it comes to the expenditures on benefits?
Well, your greatest expense is going to be your health and welfare, which is your medical, dental. So that's going to be the greatest area that you're going to focus on. Your voluntary benefits are of concern, but they're not as critical as your medical because that's what's most important.
Right.
And every organization is going to have a different set of voluntary benefit plans that they're going to offer. So when we're doing an analysis, we'll be looking at variances as it relates to copays or premiums or employee contribution rates. We have to understand all of the intricacies of that. You also sometimes have different geographic regions that offer different benefits.
Sure, yeah.
And different plans. So for instance, California had certain medical plans that I've encountered that people were really sad to lose their medical plans.
Kaiser, probably.
Kaiser, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's always going to be a challenge. And believe me, I've had conversations ad nauseum with people's association with a carrier logo and the affinity they have for the logo and whether or not that actually equates to good value and benefits, but that's probably a different conversation for a different day. But I want to stay on pre as much as we can until we get to the post. Culture. I do want to come back to this because how do you evaluate cultural fit? And how do you determine whether or not one culture is going to fit into the acquiring culture, or if there are things that will cause issues that you can identify on the front end? What would you be looking for?
Culture is a difficult, I believe, aspect to really evaluate. How can you determine it? Do you have a culture of accountability, for instance? Do you have a culture of education? So is that part of your prevailing theme as an organization? And it often does come from your top down. But it's interesting, a lot of times when you're looking at hiring people, you have A players, B players, and C players, right? And this is interesting. Steve Jobs would only really target his A players. But oftentimes your B players and C players have a greater impact on your culture than your A players do because they're so intent on what they're doing. So across exposure and diverse employee population group is really important. So when you're looking at the cultures, but you can have also a corporate culture versus an office or a branch culture.
Of course,
So it's across the board. And I think it's when you have a culture of accountability and a culture of kindness, I think it really has an impact. Obviously, you have to be driving the business. So if you don't have that drive to excel and to expand, and if that's not part of your mission statement, then you'd have to really look at that seriously.
Well, yeah, I wanted to expound upon this, and the reason being is I've actually been at an organization that acquired another organization.
Okay.
Not too dissimilar culture, and I'm looking at the sales lens especially because that's the vantage point I had during this acquisition. But one of the things that I noticed is you started to see some disconnect or some disgruntled opinions from the entity that was acquired because, oh, well, we don't do it this way. Or, oh, we don't believe their benefit package is as good as the one that we sell. And I love the one I sell. And now I've got to go sell one that I believe personally is inferior. And you have this, maybe these are anecdotal, but I think it was actually something that was relatively common amongst that unique population of salespeople, is that they were a little bit upset about the acquisition because that's not the company I joined. I'm now rolling up into this bigger company and that's not who I wanted to work for.
Right.
And so I just got to see some of that discontent is the word. I was over on the sidelines selling another product and sort of unaffected, but I would ride along with some of these guys and hear about their complaints and I go, okay, if I was in their shoes, I could understand why some of these things weren't desirable for them. And then you have the question of redundancy of talent and redundancy in territory, and then concerns, well, how long am I going to be at this job? If I'm not quite as good as the other person that's in this territory, are they going to get the better relationships than I am? And so it was a really interesting firsthand experience to see what it was like for an entity to be acquired and not have everybody happy about the result of that.
Yeah, and you're not going to make everybody happy. I think, though, you asked a lot as it related to, pre-deal. If you can iron that out on the front end, you're so much more ahead of the game, right? Because a lot of times companies are buying the EBITDA, they're trying to have it happen, they're trying to push the deal forward sooner than later. And also the size and scope of the acquisition that you have will often have an impact on your integration period.
Okay.
So if it's 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, because you have to recognize it can take that year to start to iron out the different territories, right? But if you have that on the front end and you've somewhat established your head of sales or your head of development, whatever you might call that role, then you can get a general framework for what that looks like.
Yeah.
But it's not always perfect for everybody.
No.
But if I could say, the key, though, is understanding and educating your people and your employees, even, once a deal goes through.
Chronic health issues, surprise out-of-network medical bills, inflated medical and prescription drug prices. These issues cost self-insured employers hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Add to this the rising cost of care and potential for waste across the life of a claim, and it's clear that self-insured employers need innovative solutions that lower their health plan spend. At Valence, we've done just that, developed innovation that shifts the current paradigm. A complete and integrated ecosystem solution driven by data, one that manages and simplifies the complexity of medical claim costs. It is through analyzing millions of data points that we enable employers to realize and fuel cost-saving solutions. Valence experts come prepared from day one, targeting the fraction of claims that will drive the majority of health plan costs. That is how our team lives the Valence promise, engaging early and often for smarter, better, faster healthcare.
Yeah, so let's inch ourselves towards there. It's like, okay, the deal is going through or is now complete. I've kind of done what I was supposed to do up to that due diligence period. Acquisition is complete. Now the role of HR changes, right? But it's just as important, if not more important, kind of working with the people after the acquisition. So what happens next? What's your role?
Right. So first and foremost is one of the things is that I did build a HR M&A team independently. Okay. So we had the resources to be able to help the assimilation process.
I see. Okay.
Critical. Okay. Absolutely critical. But I would say in everything that we did, because I'm so passionate about this from an integration standpoint, everything that we did, one of the most important, let's say, tools we used was change management, was beginning to educate the acquiring company on change management so that we gave them the insights of what to expect. So, for instance, you brought up your example of like, were you a bit discontent? Well, did anybody tell you what was going to happen to you or what potentially was going to be the case, right?
Well, you said, though, that sometimes these things are confidential until they actually do happen, right? And so if you're a field salesperson, you're a little below on the totem pole of in the need-to-know basis until it happens. And then yours almost like there's a little bit of probably shock, right, as a result of that sometimes. So I deal with the change management there. Like what kind of stuff or what does a communication process look like on day one?
Well, that's one of the biggest issues is communication. communication needs to even be that much more pronounced.
Okay.
Because when you're communicating not just to the acquiring company, but to your current organization. Now, if your current organization is regularly acquiring companies, they're going to be used to it.
Sure.
But change management was critical. It was transformational to educate and train people.
Well, and we're, as human beings, we're always so self-centered. So the first question is like, well, how does this impact me?
What's in it for me?
What's in it for me?
100%.
Because you set aside, I presume we bought this company because it's a great opportunity or a good business and it'll make our business healthier or better, right? Let's set that aside. What about me? Yeah. So I'm sure there's like a subset of people, and you were actually giving me some of the profiles of like the early adopters or the folks that are willing to lean in, the resistors or whatever you want to call them. But talk to me about those different personas that you can help identify and how you might communicate differently to those people.
Yeah, so without a doubt, you're 100% right. So you can have multitude of reactions, let's say, to the acquisition. You have resistors, right? They're going to resist it. They're just not going to.
These are the.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Those resistors are often talented enough that they can go anywhere.
Fair.
Yeah. So they're the ones who are actually the ones you really want to engage with.
Yeah.
And then you have the ones that are jumping right in. Hey, my company decided to sell. I'm with it. I'm all in. Okay. So you have those that are, and those people are great and easy. Then you have the waiters. They'll kind of sit back and say, what am I going to do? How am I going to look at this? And then you have people that kind of sit on the sidelines and they just watch everybody and they're just thinking.
I'm trying to analyze myself right now and say, which one would I be? You just described. But I think it is interesting. You said the resistor may resist because they have the feeling that they have options. And if I don't like this, I'm just going to leave. Perhaps the early adopters are going, oh my God, I want to keep my job, right? So that I'm going to do everything I can to toe the company line and play by the rules and lean in and feel exuberant about this process because maybe there is some fear driving that behavior there. And then your role as a CHRO is to what? You're proactively helping these organizations communicate this? Are you building a communication strategy around it? Like you're almost selling the deal to the people, right?
You are.
Okay.
So there's a couple of factors. So am I a resistor because I'm resentful that perhaps the seller got all this money and I didn't, right?
Fair.
So, or am I, as a seller, going to make sure that my top 10 people or top 20 people, whatever the number might be, are going to get some equity in the deal? Mm-hmm. So there's many different factors that can add to someone's reaction.
I see. Okay.
Or preclude it from even occurring. So, that's another factor as it relates to financial rewards.
I see. And do you equate when a deal goes through that there might be a percentage of the population that just voluntarily decides to leave? Like, is that a common occurrence where you see some attrition as a result of the acquisition?
Well, again, talk about change management. So if they're changing, that means I have to change and go to another company and start all over again.
Fair.
So some will weigh that. Okay, well, I'm changing. Might as well try it here first. Give it a shot for a year, which is what I've seen. Most people stayed. Most people, if they were going to leave, they leave before the deal happened. Or they'll give you a year.
Okay.
So you have a window.
You have a window of time.
You do.
Okay, so we're kind of talking about day one, though, but now let's get one month in or 6 months in. What changes about the process that HR is conducting versus during that change management?
It's trying to get ahead of the frustrations.
Okay.
There's definitely challenges for the acquiring company to assimilate into an organization. Everything's new. Benefits are new. Payroll's new. Processes are new. Their leadership might have changed, right? So now they reported to one person and now they report to someone else who they've never met. So there's a lot for the acquiring company. And so from an HR perspective, to add that value, to get the hands-on and to have those touch points with our employees, we made a huge effort to do that. And that's really important to me. I'm a big fan of what we call the business partner role.
Okay.
And that involvement with the stakeholders, with the acquiring company, and ensuring that they have hands-on and they're ahead of anything that they're hearing in the field. So HR has to be highly proactive. And when you have really good HR, you're going to have a proactive team. It's getting ahead of that curve where you can. It's, again, training, educating, identifying issues.
Well, and I want to ask you about, you said you built a really scalable, repeatable process during this time. So, talk to me about some of the processes that you identified and built into your analysis.
So we would have work streams, right? And so in those work streams, particularly as it relates to the HR, we'd have different functionality. So is the work stream as it relates to M&A itself, right? So what's our playbook on that? What are we identifying as our key issues? they might be the benefit plans, they might be integrations, they might be operations. How are we working with the ops teams? How are we working with the sales teams? And it's bringing it together. What's our learning and development plans and programs? And inviting those people to get L&D. Now, a lot of times depends upon the size and scope of the organization that you're buying, right? Because if they're smaller, they might be less sophisticated and they may not have their own internal learning and development plans.
I see.
And programs. So it's across the board and granting that exposure.
Okay.
And building upon it.
And building upon it. Yeah. Okay.
And as I was saying, you can have an XY axis as it relates to size of deal into integration time period, right? So your smaller deals are going to integrate pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Your larger deals are going to take more time.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of people folding up into one. And there are entities out there of that size that are doing these crazy, we see it in the broker world, these huge organizations acquiring one another. And just like, how are you going to meld 30,000 people with 50,000 people and have one company culture? It almost seems like an impossible task to me. Yeah.
I think it's pretty daunting.
Yeah, daunting. We won't call it impossible. We'll call it daunting.
It can be daunting, but you do the best that you can. And again, because if I'm sitting in a local office, I don't really care necessarily what corporate is always doing. What's really important to me is that local office.
Okay.
So you can't minimize the impact of those smaller teams and those smaller groups.
Having spent years working alongside healthcare leaders, brokers, and employers, I know how overwhelming healthcare can feel for our customers. We've all been there. Those renewal conversations that never seem to get easier. Rising pharmacy costs and medical costs, and no real transparency into where healthcare dollars are going. That's why I'm excited about Nomi Health. They're not just fixing the old system. They've rebuilt self-funded benefits from the ground up. With Nomi's network, you can offer something truly different. No copays, no deductibles, zero out-of-pocket costs when members see a provider. It's the kind of benefit that makes everyone ask, why hasn't healthcare always worked this way? Ready to bring your clients something different? Visit nomihealth.com and see how Nomi is rebuilding healthcare, one employer and one community at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned over coffee, you kind of have an affinity for the middle market. Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, I do.
Okay.
Because
I do as well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And what is it about that kind of size of company? Let's call them a couple hundred people to maybe a few thousand people. Like, what is it about the middle market space that you like so much?
Well, a lot of it has been where I have focused where our private equity firms have focused, and they're really driving business and acquisitions in that middle market. Now, your larger PE firms are going to go after the larger companies and the acquisitions on that. But as you know, it's a very costly event to do. But I think you're dealing with a lot of people that want the change. Sometimes when you're with an organization, it can grow stale. Anything can grow stale. So sometimes that acquisition is let's embrace it because we're going to get greater resources available to us. We're going to have greater opportunities. We'll be able to expand our personal careers, which ultimately many people are looking for.
Yeah.
As you and I talked about, sometimes organizations, they really, individuals don't want to necessarily advance. Maybe the given time of the year, they might have young children or just family requirements, or personal goals on a different way. So when you're really looking at that, you want to get a general framework of what the individuals are looking for. And in that middle market space, it allows you to do that. And it's interesting, when you look at the statistics, since 2017, 2018, they run about 13 to 15, 16,000 acquisitions a year.
In the middle market space?
And all holistically.
Okay.
Most of them are in the middle market space. If you were to do a bell curve, you would see that your middle market space is where your driver for those acquisitions would be.
That's a lot of acquisitions.
It's a lot of acquisitions.
My goodness, I didn't realize that was that much activity.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of this conversation, we can talk somewhat about the future state of that, and what the market looks like right now, how healthy is the M&A market, et cetera. But I want to stay on the role of the CHRO, and then I do want to talk to you about recruiting and identifying talent, because I think you mentioned that at the onset that's something you love. But like, when I guess would you say, and this may be a hard question to answer, is the sort of the change management done? Is there a period of time in the middle market space where 2 to 3 years in, we've done our job, we don't really have to focus on convincing folks that this is a great fit or they should be here? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of like, when can you sunset all the efforts in that process of acquisition where now it's just one company and we get to move on to the next?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And
I know it's a hard one.
And if we had the answer, we might make millions on that alone. Again, it's going to depend upon the size and scope.
Okay.
But here's the other thing. A lot of times you have founder syndrome, right? And so sometimes, So founder syndrome is entrepreneur started his own business or acquired it from their families, and they really hold on to it and they can't let go, but they sell it because it's lucrative, right? So they make a lot of money. They might be retiring or sunsetting their career. They may have family members that no longer want to run it, or they're tired and want to do something different. So there's many reasons why an organization is going to sell, right? And where the price point just might be too hard to refuse.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money happening in that. So price point might just be too tough. So when you're looking at that, you're saying, okay, I'm a founder. I'm going to sell my company. I had an example. I was brought in to do an integration after the acquisition.
Okay.
It was a year process. Founders really struggled to give up their company.
Yeah.
And it was combative, unfortunately, because it was hard, right? Because they're like, no, I own this company. Like, well, you sold the company and you got the check. So it's time for you just to integrate. So sometimes you have personalities that even when they're founders, they can't let go.
Yeah.
It's like they're holding on so tight.
It's their baby.
It is their baby.
I get that. I've seen it firsthand where you get so married to the idea and so married to the vision of what you've created. And at some point, like, you have to accept that it might need to be relinquished, right? Or maybe somebody needs to come in and is better as an operator. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, you founded the company and you created the product, but this person is going to operate the company a lot better and build out the personnel and the infrastructure and the tech better than maybe you can. And if there is a financial incentive to do so and it's lucrative, you also have to accept that maybe I personally need to step back for this organization to grow.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of conversations are had at the leadership levels.
Yeah.
Critical. I've also had organizations that bought their company back after a year or 2 years.
Really?
They didn't want the acquisition. They didn't want the money. They wanted to go back. So that pre-deal work is really important to understand. And the more you have that on the front end, because what's happening is many times you'll find in the acquisitions, they're just buying EBITDA, right? So they are, diagnostically looking at what they can benefit from it.
Yeah.
Well, that might not be the same motivation for the seller. So there's getting aligned with that, and that might be a cultural fit to your point earlier as to how you can ensure that you have that identified in the front end.
Do you have any stories about just a deal that just went belly up, or yes, it went through, but man, it was not a fit after post-acquisition?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're still existing today. And then the challenges is one in particular that I'm thinking of. The seller sold, miserable, unhappy that he sold, has an earnout and a buyout period, highly successful in his work, but which is a problem, there's no succession plan. So what happens is the company goes in and pays all this money to buy this company, and there's no succession plan in place. Because now we know that there's a time clock that's moving until that person ends up leaving, the leader ends up leaving. But who's going to take over those millions of revenue?
Well, do you think that was a miss in the due diligence process by the acquiring company? Because not to know there's a succession plan in place, that feels like a big miss to me, right?
I do.
With not having all the pieces of the story, I'm sure. But yeah, it's like, well, who's going to run it after this person? You didn't think about that beforehand?
Yeah, and they're buying the EBITDA so quickly, and it's like, okay, really understand that.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged in a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
Well, I focus on the broker space since it's what I know, but I mean, just the massive number of acquisitions I've seen, at least in insurance agency, insurance broker space. And I'm sure there's got to be so many that looked good on paper that just are not a fit. And there's probably some buyers or sellers remorse happening right now. I did talk to one gentleman that went through that himself and wasn't as advertised, I guess, from his perspective. Yeah, money was great, was sold on kind of the cultural fit and all that, and then realized pretty quickly that that wasn't the case. Ended up stepping away from the business for a couple of years before coming back because he was just so burnt out about it, right?
But then you have the opposite because you have those that have sold and said, best thing I ever did.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really in that due diligence process to understand what you're really getting and to understand the mindset of the seller.
Okay. Do you want to talk about recruiting and talent and stuff?
Sure.
I think that's a lot of fun. So have you really, did you want to finish?
I wanted to say, because being in the private equity space, we did a lot of the acquisitions, but I also did a number of sales, right? So we sold companies and to prepare companies for sale. So that's another really important factor is how do you prepare a company for sale in that transition?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So we had one example. We had a company, the mantra, I was brought in to turn around the HR department and to prepare the company for sale. But we had turnover rates 50, 60%, way too high from an employee standpoint. You cannot, we're talking a little bit in a minute on talent acquisition. Well, you also have to talk talent retention. So we had a situation where the turnover rate was so high and we didn't know what to do because we were losing value of the company. Right?
Yeah, of course.
So we implemented a new program. I went to the board and I pitched to them to start to give options at the manager level, which is very unusual. Not just at the senior manager level and director's level, but at the manager level. And it was transformative.
Yeah.
Absolutely transformative. It was exciting. It was dynamic. They embraced it. We turned the company around in 9 months and we were able to sell the company at a fair market value.
Yeah, and it was just I wouldn't say it was a little shift because I'm sure the outlay in order to offer those options to folks and what that meant to them in terms of value was substantial to those individuals.
Substantial.
But to maybe the company, it probably wasn't as substantial as the meaning it might have had to the one individual or individuals receiving them, right? But I can relate because it's just having that little bit of extra skin in the game. I mean, you think about it as a salesperson, especially, most salespeople are compensated on what they produce in that given year, right? But you add a little bit of long-term value into the equation where now I'm not just working for this year, I'm working for maybe 5 years down the line. And there's some future value associated with it. And if I do my job well and everybody else rallies around, we now build the value of the organization up and now those things are worth even more. That's such the psychological shift of that. I could see that just being immensely impactful.
And isn't that the American dream in many ways?
Yeah.
To get that opportunity to be the best you can, to be acknowledged for your achievements, and then to be motivated to keep advancing the
You know what it
organization.
communicates? My company actually cares about me.
It does.
Right? And I know it's sometimes you can get in really stale corporate environments or sterile corporate environments where you just feel like a number or a line on a spreadsheet, right? But that signals to those individuals like we value you enough that we want to give you a piece of ownership and we care about your future financial health as well. The signal that sends to the person, it was just so meaningful. Like I can relate because I've experienced it firsthand and you would look at some of those situations. I don't know what some of these options will be worth in the future. They could literally be worth zero. Okay. So let's be very fair about that. But just the possibility of that upside is the American dream, exactly like you're describing.
Because the company is saying, I'm investing in you.
Yes.
I believe in you enough, I'm investing in you. And so from a retention standpoint, it has tremendous power and impact.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably studies out there that even show that the tenure of an individual as associated with those options being given, it has to extend the average tenure as well, because now sometimes it can be viewed as golden handcuffs, and I get that. But now, I'm more likely to stay because I want this thing to come to fruition. I don't view my time here as ephemeral or temporal or temporary because now I want this to work, right?
Right.
So I'm going to stick it out, even if maybe on one day or two I get a little bit disgruntled about my work life. So those things are powerful.
And it's interesting because I talk a little bit about retention. I like turnover. Okay. So
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
I'm a fan of turnover.
All right. Tell me you like turnover.
But not too much. So I'm okay with 7% turnover. I think turnover in an organization, 7-8% is good to an organization. It's healthy. It keeps new exchanges. It keeps new ideas coming in. But when you start to hit double digits turnover, that's a problem. So you really have to evaluate what we as leaders are doing.
That makes sense.
To ensure that. But give me a regular steady state turnover. Yeah. It's great.
Well, I guess it would make sense too, because likely the folks that are turning, well, it may be both ends of the spectrum, but likely some of them are massive underperformers, right?
Yes.
And they're turning over because they just didn't cut it for one reason or another. And then you might also have some overperformers that turn over because they're being recruited away and money's luring them away as well.
Well, you need to retain them.
You need to retain them. Okay. You don't want those people to leave, ideally.
You need to retain your
But I think you also have to be aware and suspect that that's going to be happen. So that competitive position you're in to retain that talent as well is crucial, right? You have to make it worth their while. Those A and A plus players, you got to make it worth their while to stay, right?
And that's the whole democratic way, right? It's no different than pricing anything. You need to pay your people, pay them well, or someone else will come and take them and could lose a lot of critical thinking.
Well, and that's, I would say, is very common in the space we're in, benefit side, but also, carrier and vendor partner side as well, is that they, if you have a decent track record of success, especially in sales, people come knocking on your door.
They do.
They throw some serious dollars at you as well. And that may naturally happen. They're actually, I could think from a company standpoint, they might also say, yes, you're one of our top players. However, those dollar amounts we simply cannot match. And so if you have a great company culture, you might also be willing to say, you know what, we wish you luck. I hope this works out. Good luck in your career. That's a great opportunity. You should take it, almost kind of situation as well. I think if it's healthy culture there. But it's funny. I would suspect a person in your position would want zero turnover, because that means you're not losing people, having to retrain them, keep reinvesting in that. But okay, all right, makes sense.
There's something on the internet a long time ago, and I loved it. I probably should have taken a snapshot of it at the time. And it was a CEO and a COO, and the COO says, to the CEO, what if we invest all this money in training and they leave us?
Right.
Right? And then the response from the CEO is, what if we don't and they stay?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So it was brilliant. And you step back and you say, that's really true, because we need to invest in our people. We need to give them the best that we can and continue to advance them and the organization. And everybody grows.
Agree more.
Everybody gets a little bit better.
Yeah, awesome. So what do you think is going to happen in the near term? I'm asking you to put your look in your crystal ball.
Yeah.
Near term M&A. And maybe we can talk, America-wide, or maybe we can focus on a certain industry. Are you seeing the M&A activity slow down, stabilize, speed up? What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's going to continue to advance. I do, because it's so driven on the economics as well. And there's a lot of buzz in the marketplace right now as it relates to interest rates, as it relates to economic forward thinking. So I do see that the M&A activity will continue. I do believe you'll see it in different industries more so. But you also have a lot of now desire for startup again in America, whether it be manufacturing. So you'll have startups, so you'll need the investors and the venture capitalists to support that as well, which can be dynamic and exciting. So there's going to be some transformation going on in that marketplace overall, whether it's venture capitals or mergers and acquisitions, private equity firms, or investors.
Yeah. And I would even say, we're shooting this in 2025, so it's post-inauguration, and irrespective of people's political beliefs, I am seeing at least optimism about the economy, at least being spoken. Maybe some things are being put in motion to incentivize onshore manufacturing and drilling and energy production. So I do feel like, at least from a sentiment standpoint, that there's growing optimism or positivity about the economy. And that may not be the case for everybody, but just trying to take a big picture look at everything. So what I hope is that does mean in the M&A space and the startup space and having money available to encourage new entrepreneurs to go solve problems, I hope the environment's going to be rich to be able to support that. And I mean that literally and figuratively rich as well.
Yeah, I think we'll have a few bumps and valleys, hills and valleys along the way, but ultimately in the 25 and looking into 26, you'll continue to see more.
We got our 250th anniversary coming up next year. That's pretty exciting as a country. But anyways, okay, so let's close that out here, Diane. And again, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Spencer. It's been delightful to be with you.
I'm glad our friend Sean Wood got us connected. And please say hello to your son, Sean Dooley, as well.
I will.
But what, closing thoughts? If somebody listened thus far, all the way through, really enjoyed the conversation, what's like one or two things you want them to take away from this convo? Yeah.
Well, I would say for HR professionals, always check who you're doing it for. You're really looking for the business to advance the businesses. Sometimes HR has a tendency to be more reactive than proactive. Make it great HR and really be proactive to your teams, to your environments, add the value. You're a business partner and continue to advance the business wherever you can. And when you do that, you'll continue to advance your own personal careers. The other thing I would say is really own your own personal career. People have a tendency to say, well, this is my boss. They're kind of managing my career. I'm all about owning your own career. Yeah. Advance it. Make the changes that you need to. Whether you yourself are in a position that you love, that you see can grow, or you find that you can't. Sometimes you have to make those changes. So own your career. I used to say, you don't give anybody else your checkbook. Well, when you own your own career, you're writing your own checks.
Yeah.
So be mindful of that. Manage your careers like you would anything else, like you would your finances. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you'll have a rich environment to continue to thrive in and grow and expand and be all that you can be.
Well, that's what, and if you don't mind, I usually kind of let's stop there, but I want to add on to what you're saying because we had this conversation over coffee. I've found that most growth comes in periods of discomfort, a season of discomfort where you are scared about, am I able to do this new job or am I able to accept this new responsibility? And you go through the anxiety of that with your own personal change management, right? But I've also found if you're willing to lean into areas that make you uncomfortable or feel a little bit like it's going to stretch your capacity, that is where you end up growing. And so for what it's worth, anybody's listening and maybe the folks that are younger than me, it's like those are the times where you have the ability to advance in your career, kind of see what you're made of. And if you're unwilling to have those periods of discomfort, that means you're probably going to stall at some point in your career. If you're happy with that, that's okay. If you found your level that you think is appropriate for you, that's great. But if you have high aspirations, then it is always going to have to include periods of discomfort and growth to get there. And so you need a willingness to be able to manage that. So that's what I'll say. Okay.
Awesome. I love it.
Diane, I appreciate you so much. Thanks, guys, for listening. And really, really thank you for coming down and talking with me, okay?
Thank you, Spencer.
Bye.